My name is Renee, and I found out I'd been erased from my stepfather's will while sitting in a lawyer's office wearing the black dress I'd worn to his funeral 3 days earlier. Gerald raised me from the time I was 6 years old. He wasn't my biological father. My real father, David, had passed away when I was a baby, before I could ever form a single memory of him. Gerald was the only father I ever truly knew. He walked me down the aisle. He cried at my college graduation louder than anyone else in the room. For 28 years, I called him Dad, and I meant it every single time. So when the family lawyer read through Gerald's will and my name simply wasn't in it, not once, not anywhere, I sat there in stunned silence while my stepbrother, Kyle, tried very hard not to smile. Gerald updated this 8 months ago, the lawyer said carefully, glancing at me with something like pity. Everything goes to Kyle and Marissa. The house, the accounts, property upstate. Kyle didn't even wait until we left the building. In the parking lot, still in his funeral suit, he turned to me with a look I'll never forget. You were never really his, Renee. Everyone kind of knew that. He just never had the heart to say it to your face. I drove home that night without crying, which surprised me more than anything else. I think somewhere underneath the shock, small, cold part of me had already started asking a very different question. Not why would Gerald do this, but why now? 8 months ago, specifically. What happened 8 months ago that made a man who raised me for 28 years suddenly write me out of his final wishes without a single word of explanation? I didn't get my answer from Gerald. I got it from an envelope that arrived at my apartment 2 weeks later, forwarded from an address I hadn't lived at in over a decade. The return sender listed only as Whitmore and Associates, a law firm I had never once heard of in my entire life. Inside the envelope was a letter, and beneath it, a second, older document that made my hands go still the moment I read the name at the top. David Allen Foster, my biological father. The letter explained everything in careful, measured language. My father, before he died, had set up a trust in my name, not through Gerald, not connected to the family I'd grown up believing was my only family, but held independently for 28 years, gaining interest, waiting for a single triggering condition specified in the original paperwork, that it would only be released to me upon either my 30th birthday or the death of my legal guardian, whichever came first. Gerald had known about this trust the entire time. He'd been listed as the trust's overseeing guardian since I was a baby, fact I never knew, because he never once mentioned it. The law firm explained something else, something that finally answered the question that had been eating at me since the parking lot. 8 months earlier, Gerald had been diagnosed with an aggressive illness he chose to keep private from everyone, including Kyle and Marissa. Knowing his time was limited, he'd contacted the firm managing my father's trust directly, confirming every detail, making sure it would transfer to me the moment he passed, exactly as David had intended nearly 3 decades earlier. Then, according to the firm's records, Gerald had done one more thing. He deliberately removed my name from his own personal will. At first, reading that felt like a second betrayal stacked on top of the first, until I reached the final page of the letter. Private note Gerald had asked the firm to include only if I ever came looking for answers. Renee, it began, in handwriting I recognized instantly from 28 years of birthday cards. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Kyle has probably already said something cruel to you, because that boy never did learn patience. I need you to understand something. I didn't remove you from my will because you weren't my daughter. I removed you because you already had a father who loved you enough to protect you before you could even walk. My money was always going to Kyle and Marissa. They need it more than you ever will. They don't have what your father left you. What you have is bigger than any house or account I could leave behind. You have proof that two men loved you enough to make sure you'd never have to depend on either of them to survive. I just made sure you'd finally get to see it. I read that letter 4 times before I could breathe normally again. The trust turned out to be worth significantly more than anything in Gerald's estate. My father, it turned out, had been quietly successful in a way nobody in Gerald's family ever knew, and every dollar had been growing untouched for 28 years, waiting for exactly this moment. I didn't tell Kyle right away. Honestly, part of me wanted to let him enjoy his little parking lot victory a bit longer. But that pettiness didn't last long. Grief has a way of burning off spite faster than you'd expect. When I finally did tell him, weeks later, over a stiff, awkward coffee neither of us really wanted, Hal went quiet in a way I'd never seen from him before. He never told us any of that, he said. About being sick, about the trust, any of it. He never told me either, I said. That was kind of his whole point. We're not close, Kyle and I don't think we ever really will be, and I've made peace with that. But something shifted that day. He apologized, quietly, for the parking lot. I think, in his own way, he was mourning a version of Gerald none of us had fully known, A man who spent his final months making sure everyone he loved would be taken care of, even if it meant taking the blame for a betrayal that was never really his to carry. I used part of the trust to set up a small scholarship in my father's name for kids being raised by stepparents or guardians, kids like me, who might spend years wondering exactly where they belong. I used another part to frame that letter, one in Gerald's familiar handwriting, and hang it in my hallway, right beside my wedding photo where he's standing beside me, beaming, in a suit he'd bought specifically for that day. People love to say blood is thicker than water. I don't think that's ever really been true. What I know now is that love, the real kind, doesn't need a shared name or a signed will to prove itself. Sometimes it just needs one father brave enough to plan ahead, and another one brave enough to step back. Both of them, in their own quiet ways, making absolutely sure I'd never have to wonder if I was truly